Do you need a publicist?
Do you need a publicist? Yeah. Well, it's very different. I know a lot of you are short filmmakers. It depends. Essentially, what a publicist is going to do for you and whether or not you need one, I think is based on what you expect. So if you want to get distribution for your film, if your film is going to do the festival circuit, it's dependent on what your goals are with the film. A lot of times you may not need a publicist if you're, Norm can speak to this, as a journalist, whether or not you think it's an advantage to have a publicist.
It depends on which publicist, quite honestly.
Right, and I think a lot of times it actually is valuable, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a publicist, but I've been doing it for a long time, and I've cultivated a lot of relationships, and I can call a lot of members of the press and get their attention, whereas if you're going in totally blind, it might be white noise. So in those cases, it is advantageous to have a publicist. If you have a short, it's already in the festival, or you're already like working your ass off, you're great at social media on your own, it might not be necessarily worth your money to spend it on an additional publicist, because it just depends on what your strengths are. But I think the primary role of the publicist is to bring visibility to your project, to get in touch with the press, to get it out there in ways that you aren't going to be able to.
Norm and Peter, what are you looking for? And as you talked about whether you have a publicist or not, like what gets through, there's over 300 films at the festival, what's going to get your attention?
Sure. I mean, Toronto especially is really, really hard because there are 300 films. It's a little easier with festivals like Sundance or Cannes where it's a much more small selection. I mean, outside of what you're personally interested in and you just sort of find it yourself, you have to be very, very careful as a filmmaker how you go about, and as a publicist actually, how you go about, asking for attention, just because, journalists are very, very busy during film festivals too, so they only have so much time and patience. So if you're badgering is never the best idea. Being really nice is probably a good idea, but making sure that when you don't get a response, not to go too far with that. Like there are some filmmakers and some publicists that will just hammer it in to the point where you're like, I don't have time for this, and I certainly don't have time for the film now. Mm-hmm. So it's getting attention is really tricky, and I think that sometimes it's just a matter of luck, but sometimes it's a matter of just being sort of careful about the way that you approach the press yourself, or as how you get the publicist to do so.
Yeah, this is probably not the best thing to say about myself, but after 20 odd years of doing this and spending literally half my life doing film festivals, if you tell me that your film is the greatest thing in the history of ever, I'm immediately going to say that's probably overstating it, and that puts you on the defensive. If the publicist says that, I know there's something wrong, because that's a sign of desperation. I mean, there are two things that I react badly to, and I presume some other people of my generation at least do, which one is if you stress the Canadian angle, because it means you don't believe in or someone doesn't believe in the film that they're selling, and they're trying to pull a national card on it. The other is, this is the highest quality thing ever. It might well be, but if you set that bar, you're creating an impenetrable wall of hype that until your film is a proven quality or your filmmaker, we all just immediately are suspicious of that. So honesty is something I respond to. Just if it's someone I've known for 20 odd years saying this is pretty good, you should check it out, then that's a publicist recommendation that I'll believe. If it's someone I've never heard of before and they're sending me 15 different images from the film and biographies and everything, and yet they won't show me the film, not a good sign. And that happens more often than you'd think. There are a lot of people working publicity who aren't really very good at it. Or at least they're not very good at relating to individuals. You might be great with an email blast, you might be good at getting the social media coverage out there, but if you don't have a physical object, if you don't have the movie itself to show people, which is always the best way to get your message out. DVDs are great because they don't crap out in the middle, very rarely. Show me your movie. Ask me if I want to see it, I will almost always say yes. If you ask me 2 hours before it's screening, and it's the last screening, and you finally found me in a room somewhere, don't be surprised if we have a million other things to do that minute. But me personally, I want to see your film. I don't want to hear about it until I can see it. I absolutely do not want an interview with a filmmaker or talent if I can't see the movie. If it's not ready, don't even approach us, because we will inevitably just, like, our backs go up. We just become defensive. And this is, again, my diamond shoes are too tight, but a terrible job I have. When you're at the film festival, you're in a constant, you're in stimulus overload the minute the first press conference comes out. We all hate that. We hate that email that says, it's starting. And you're like, oh, good, my life's over for 6 weeks. But in those 6 weeks, I will see everything I can. We're omnivorous as critics, or at least we should be as a culture. If you have something to show us, we'll probably watch it. If you're promising that you'll have something to show us, we're going to put a little check mark in the background. And then the worst thing of all is if you say, I have this amazing movie, you can't watch it until the first public screening, but you'll want to be there because it's Canadian. It's like, no. I guarantee you I'll be somewhere else at that moment. If you can't tell me where to be and when and plan it ahead, that's one thing. But if you can't actually, you know, if you're protecting your film, that's one thing. If you don't think it's ready, that's fine. When it's ready, I want to see it. If it's not ready, or you're worried about what happens when people see it, we can always tell. There's a light that goes off. There's some sort of code that you can always read where it's like, oh no, you can see it. What was the last year? There was one where the film was embargoed up the ass, basically. They showed it to us 3 weeks early. It was an unfinished version. The final music wasn't there. And they said, this is the only time you can see it if you want to get an interview. And I said, well, okay, but I reserve the right to cancel that interview if it's not good. And I reserve the right to not like your movie. Like, that's the other thing. You really have to be prepared for not bad press, but a negative reaction, because not everyone will like the thing you've made. It's inevitable. Not everybody likes the thing I write. Not everybody. It's just, you know, you're never going to get 100% success ratio with anything. So if you explode in rage at the first negative review, don't forget there's probably going to be 5 positive reviews. And, you know, declaring a fatwa against the critic is never a good idea. I just say that from personal experience. But yeah, by the time your film screens at the festival, it's too late, I find. It's almost impossible to get attention unless you have people behind you. And that's when...
Start now.
Absolutely.
They're already screening right now.
I saw my first TIFF film last week.
Yeah.
I hate that, but...
They get to
It
be
was
where they're
July.
doing 9 a.m., 11 a.m., 1 p.m. screenings, and the journalists just sit there all day.
Yeah, and we're into it. We're totally fine with it. It's part of the job, and I'm committed to that. And TIFF is actually really good about screening short films, especially Short Cuts Canada, early. So make sure your film is finished and ready to be screened. It probably already is, I'm assuming, for the most part.
And be willing to show it.
And show the hell out of
Yeah.
it. Offer links, offer DVDs. You're going to be, like, we're just talking about this outside, and this is the most cynical thing I'm going to say all day, I promise. You're competing with the Oscar campaigns of every major studio in the world. You're competing with Norway and their best foreign language push. So get your message out early and get people to see your, like, give me the disc on the way out the door. I guarantee you I will watch it tonight. That's my promise to you. The earlier, the better.
What I think you can do during the festival, probably something very important, is an opportunity socially, and especially if you're first-time filmmakers or you don't really know this world yet, there are opportunities at night to get to know people that are journalists, that are whoever, to build these relationships so it's a lot easier the next time around.
That's true.
And that's, I think, during the festival is probably the most important thing is you know, becoming a part of the community, because it's, you know, there's a lot of different aspects of the community, and knowing people, it's mutually beneficial for me to know a filmmaker and for a filmmaker to know me, so.
Yeah.
And as a follow-up question for you, Peter, what do you and IndieWire look for at the festival? And not necessarily profile pieces, but what gets your attention? What creates a good story?
I mean, there's pressure on us to get traffic, which is how we make money and how we're judged as people, unfortunately. So especially at a festival like TIFF, you know, those Oscar campaign, Weinstein, you know, hoo-ha, that is what's going to probably get the most hits. But if something speaks to us, it's always nice during the zoo of that to write something about something you care about. So if you know, it's a matter of trying to find something. I mean, I don't know how somebody could show that to me. It just sort of happens, but it's nice to do something nice. It's nice to feel like you're doing something good with your job, as opposed to just, you know, making someone's Oscar campaign easier. So it's, yeah, if it's good, and when you're a good person, you're going to want to help out filmmakers that have done something decent. So,
Yeah. And certainly from the perspective of now as well, like our website traffic. My 3 favorite films last year were at TIFF were Stories We Tell, Leviathan, and Amour, all of which would make my top 10 list for the respective years. And the pieces that got the most traffic, the biggest hits, were my interview with Kristen Stewart and Garrett Hedlund from On the Road, and my interview with Place Me on the Pines, the Ryan Gosling thing, because those are the names that got picked up and circulated, and it had nothing to do with the coverage. The interview with Sarah didn't happen until October, so we couldn't do a lot for stories we tell. But it's irrelevant to the work you do. Like ultimately, my hit count is, I literally can't pay attention to it during the festival. I'm just filing copy and seeing movies and doing interviews. But then later you find out, oh, this is the thing that got the most traffic, and it was the one where, I described Kristen Stewart as seeming uncomfortable in an interview situation. I didn't accomplish anything there. I wish people had gone to see the movies that we talked about that week and the week before and the week before that. So I have to be satisfied with the job that I'm doing, with the copy that I'm putting out, rather than the reception that one or another film gets. So you guys just put everything into what you're doing, and don't worry if you can. It's a luxury to think about success during the festival. You'll be so busy selling your film, shooting it, or screening it, and talking to people that will become its own job. I should hope.
All right, so what about finding the right publicist for you? What's a good way, Angie and Stephen, do you think, to find someone? If you do decide to go down the route of hiring an external publicist outside of the TIFF one, how do you find someone who's right for you? And where? And this time of year?
Yeah, well, I mean, TIFF has a list of publicists for hire, and you can speak to them and they'll suggest people. Personally, I think whether or not you click with your publicist is huge, because you're going to work harder for someone from my end if you really like them and you love the project and you get along with them, whatever. And I've had people approach me who were just not on the same page, and I'm pretty honest about saying to them, I'm not going to take your money. I just don't think this is a good fit. And I think you should shop around a little bit if you are looking for a publicist, and you should talk to a few people and see, you could even really click with a newbie I know a ton of them who are this is their first TIFF, and they're really passionate, and they may not have the long-standing relationships with Norm or Peter, but they are really passionate. You get along with them beautifully, and it would be great to give them a chance. I strongly believe mostly it's a personality click. Talk to people, don't pick the first person that's suggested to you. I think that's the best thing you can do for yourself.
And ask your friends and colleagues, just ask around, right? Like hiring a publicist is like hiring a contractor. There's a lot of them out there. So it's just a matter of finding out what's the right one for you. Ask the publicist, interview them, right? Find out what kind of films they like, if they specialize in something, if they know the Canadian media more than the U.S. media or the international media. You really have to come up with the right questions before you approach a publicist. So you have to come up with what's important for you. Figure out your goals first, how you want to approach a festival, what your plan of attack, and explain to the publicist, this is what I'm thinking about doing, and is this something that we can work with? Because each one of you may have different plans of attack. If you're looking for a publicist who gets you into tons of parties, I'm definitely not the right guy for you. I actually turn down filmmakers like that because I'm not interested in that. There are publicists I know who are really good at that and who can get people in left, right, and center. But I don't want to be one of those publicists. So there are different kinds of publicists out there. So it's a matter of finding out which one makes the most sense for you.
Oh, and may I add, try to remember that when you're hiring a publicist, it's for your film, and it generally isn't for you. It's not for unless that's what you're hiring for. But you should make that clear to the publicist, because I'm a film publicist. I'm not a personal publicist. So I'm not necessarily going to get you a cover story on the body of your work, or come out 2 months after it's screened and be able to get you a profile piece somewhere. I think that's important, and that kind of ties in with what Stephen was saying about getting you into parties and things. That falls a little bit more into the sort of personal publicist and not the film publicist. It's gray. They kind of combine, but it's not necessarily the same thing.
But essentially, the more you ask for a publicist, because a publicist can do as little or as much as you want, right? So, but the corresponding budget has to come with that, right? So If you have a small budget, it doesn't seem reasonable to ask a publicist, okay, well, I want you to do all this stuff, get me into parties, get me the front cover of Now, blah, blah, blah. It kind of has to make a bit of sense. So try to think, before you approach a publicist, think about, okay, how much do I want to spend, or how much can I spend on the publicist, and what do I want to see the most happen? At the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what do I want to see happen at the end of the festival that would say, that was a good festival for me? That's the question that you need to ask yourself.
Don't
no, I'm
forget
open.
though that print is also.
Dying. Coughing up blood.
I was going to say limited, but if you are only focusing on print journalists, you're going to hear a lot back that real estate is limited, and quite frankly, I've noticed a big shift coming from distribution going to more independent films, where now that I hear, sorry, if it doesn't have distribution and it's not eventually going to get a theatrical release, we can't cover it.
That's sort of my life.
So I would encourage you to really hit online.
Yeah, because we don't have rules.
Right.
Like, not in the same way that print does. We can publish anything whenever. And I mean, I just, there's lots of blogs. There's so many blogs out there that are here, and they're the ones that are just publishing stuff as it happens, because that's the way that works. And we have a blog network at IndieWire. We have a blog that focuses on women in film, African American film, gay and lesbian film. Like, if you have a niche market, like, go find those people that are writing about that niche market, especially if you're a short filmmaker, because I mean, there's not too many, like, it's a lot more limited in terms of who's going to write about your short film. But if you can find the right person, especially online, who's here and looking for something to write about, they'll be the ones that will do it.
Yeah.
And just be nice to them.
And sorry, can I just give you advice? If you're going, and this is where I come think, I don't think you really need a publicist. It's just a matter of how you formulate your pitch, how you approach journalists, right? Because if you're going to send an email to Norm or Peter Howell, make sure you have a good pitch. Just don't say, introduce yourself. I have a film at the film festival, this is what it's called, but then come up with a good pitch. Don't say it's a really good film. Tell them why it's a good film, right? And it doesn't have to be really long. Just have a two-liner why they should see it. Like, put yourself in their shoes. They're really busy. They've heard everything before, so try to convince them why they should see it. You know your film's better than anybody else, right? So tell them why.
Describe it to us as though you were describing it to a family member
Sure.
you haven't seen in a while. You don't have to get elaborate. You don't have to be exquisite in your description. You can simply say it's a story about a guy and a bear. Well, there's a bear in it. I'm interested. The basic points. Does anybody have a bear in there? Sure, because we should talk. But the most basic storytelling points. It's fine because we all know it's not what it's about. It's how it is about it. To quote Roger Ebert, it's the style of the film. If you get us interested in the story, then we're going to want to see how you tell it. And that's all I ever need. A log line of a sentence. I try not to watch trailers. I try to avoid reading about films before I see them. I just don't want the experience spoiled for me. And I want to discover the movie. And that's, the greatest thing you have on your side is novelty, because we don't know who you are. And if you're the next great talent, we should know that. And we want to find that out. We want to see the films. But seriously, be honest and be succinct.
Yeah. And always, 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 always carry a couple of copies on DVD of your film.
That's true.
During the festival. Always.
Yeah. You never know who you're going to give it to.
Always. It's like your calling card. Yeah.
And we'll put it in our bag. If you give us a Vimeo link, we'll probably forget it.
Yeah.
It'll be written on a piece of paper that we'll never see again.
That's a good one.
Yeah. But it's nice at the end of the festival when you have a bag full of DVDs and you're just like, I'll just lay in bed and do this. And that's,
See, I get home and I cry.
maybe it asked me in 10 years, maybe I'll do it.
Yeah, but no, realistically, you could, as I was saying, Ben Affleck might be 3 doors over. You might be able to give him your disc. You might be able to give it to a critic you wouldn't otherwise have met that day. Yeah, be prepared. Calling cards, business cards, and DVDs.
Be your own publicist. It's really not rocket science, It's not. So be prepared, right?
Just don't be extra touchy. We hate that.
But be
Yeah.
careful with the self-promotion. This is an era of self-promotion in a very extreme way. Just be very careful about self-promotion, because sometimes you don't really realize how you're coming across, and just be very mindful of being too boastful when you're, pretty new to this, or be mindful of coming across like just like somebody that person's not going to respond to. So yeah, I would just if you're going to post something, read it over first and just think about it before you post it. Like, not like I'm the best thing ever sort of thing is
You're,
not gonna
you're
work.
an idiot if you don't like this.
Yeah, and one other thing, actually, this is something that I learned when I was younger. Your enthusiasm level will stay constant because this is your first time with a short film at the Toronto Film Festival, and you're going to be jazzed. You're going to be jazzed all day. That is great. By 3 o'clock, you are going to be more energetic than anybody else. So don't start worrying about people not keeping up with you. They won't. You are going to be more focused about your film than anybody else will be in those 10 days. There's nothing wrong with that. It's how it should be. But if somebody else doesn't respond with the same immediate enthusiasm, it's okay. It's just like they're tired. That's all it is. It's not a personal slight. Yeah, that's it. I mean, you have boundless energy, and you should direct it in the best possible place, which is towards the promotion of your film. But until people see it, and like it as much as you do, they're not necessarily going to be as receptive. That's all. Just don't take that personally, because it's happening to 300 other people at the same time.